The story of Nefertiti, one of the most debated, most mysterious, and most captivating figures of the ancient world, was, in fact, rewritten because of a single discovery. On the morning of December 6, 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt and his team uncovered one of the most iconic artifacts in human history. As they brushed away the dust of more than 3,000 years, something extraordinary revealed itself. A face with high cheekbones, a slender neck, defined facial contours, and features so lifelike that it seemed as if the sculpture was quietly breathing. This was the bust of Nefertiti. Borchardt, overwhelmed by excitement, wrote in his notes, "The colors look as if they were applied yesterday." An exceptional and astonishing work. From that moment on, the world met Nefertiti not as a forgotten queen of a distant past, but as a timeless icon whose beauty and mystery survived millennia beneath desert sands. But Nefertiti's newfound fame was not new for her own era. She had already been a powerful and controversial figure long before her rediscovery. Although today she is celebrated as a symbol of elegance and artistic perfection, in her own time she was one of the most polarizing leaders in Egyptian history. Her birthplace and birthday remain uncertain. The most common theory places her birth around 1370 BCE in Thebes, the capital of Egypt at the time. But nothing about her early life is fully clear. Several competing theories attempt to reveal who she truly was. One theory suggests that Nefertiti was the daughter of Ai, an influential court official and tutor of the future pharaoh Amenhotep IV. According to ancient inscriptions, however, Ai's wife Te was not Nefertiti's biological mother, but her wet nurse. Another theory proposes that Nefertiti was the daughter of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, which would make her and Amenhotep IV half-siblings. Yet there is no evidence that Nefertiti ever carried the title typically reserved for royal daughters. A third theory places her origins far beyond Egypt's borders, claiming she was Tadukipa, a princess of the Mitanni kingdom, which once ruled regions of southeastern Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia. According to this view, she was first married to Amenhotep III, and later became the wife of his son, Amenhotep IV. When Amenhotep IV ascended the throne of Thebes around 1353 BCE, Nefertiti stood beside him, not merely as a queen, but as an ambitious partner with a sharp political instinct. She was around 17 years old, strikingly charismatic, and unusually active in both political and religious matters. And it was precisely these interests that shaped one of the most dramatic transformations in ancient Egyptian history. Before their reign, Egypt followed a traditional polytheistic belief system, dominated by the powerful priesthood of Amun, the supreme deity worshipped across the empire. But Amenhotep IV and Nefertiti began favoring Aten, the sun disk, with an intensity that soon evolved into radical religious revolution. Eventually, worship of all other gods was banned. Schools were closed. The state's resources were redirected. The traditional religious order collapsed. Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning servant of Aten. Nefertiti's name was also altered. She became Neferuaten Nefertiti, meaning the beautiful one of Aten's beauties. Together, they sought to rebuild Egypt's cultural and political identity from the ground up. But their reforms faced enormous resistance. The city of Thebes still contained temples, statues, and symbols dedicated to the old gods. The Amun priesthood, wealthy, influential, and deeply rooted, saw the new order as a direct threat. This tension pushed Akhenaten and Nefertiti to establish an entirely new capital. Following what they believed to be divine guidance, they selected a remote area in Middle Egypt, a fertile plain, neither too close to Memphis nor to Thebes. There, they founded the city of Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of Aten. Construction began rapidly, fueled by the royal treasury and the labor of skilled workers relocated from other regions, including those who once built the royal tombs of the Valley of the Kings. The city grew at remarkable speed. Temples, palaces, and administrative buildings rose one after another. The city's unique architecture included open-roof structures designed to let sunlight, Aten's rays, directly reach altars and statues. Nefertiti stood not only as queen, but as a near-equal co-ruler. She participated in ceremonies, received foreign envoys, and even dispensed justice, roles almost never held by Egyptian queens. Her images appeared in temples, reliefs, and inscriptions with a frequency matched only by kings. But Egypt's transformation came at a price. The Amun priesthood opposed them, the nobility resented them, and the general population struggled with the abrupt religious shift. Akhenaten and Nefertiti increasingly isolated themselves within the palace. Security around them grew tighter. Military guards patrolled the city. Foreign threats from the Mitanni kingdom and internal tension from the priesthood pressured the couple on all sides. Meanwhile, their personal life was marked by tragedy. Their daughter Menkaten died young, and surviving inscriptions show Nefertiti and Akhenaten mourning her body, a rare emotional scene in Egyptian art. Not long after, Nefertiti suddenly disappeared from historical records. Her absence sparked countless theories. Some believe she fell from political grace, stripped of power and exiled. Others think she died of illness or grief after losing her daughter. A bold theory claims she disguised herself as a man and ruled as Smenkhara, a mysterious co-regent whose identity remains debated. Another theory links her to the famous Dakamunzu letter, in which an Egyptian queen asked the Hittite king to send her a son to marry, an unprecedented plea that rocked the ancient world. If the writer was Nefertiti, then this was a desperate bid to maintain power after Akhenaten's rule crumbled. No conclusion is universally accepted. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt rapidly rejected the Aten revolution. Temples dedicated to Aten were dismantled. The city of Akhetaten was abandoned. Statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were smashed and buried. The new pharaoh, Tutankhamun, changed his name to Tutankhamun, reopened Amun temples, and restored the old religion. But the bust of Nefertiti survived the wrath of time, politics, and revolution. And today, more than 3,300 years later, she remains one of the most iconic faces in the world, perhaps even more influential now than she ever was in her lifetime. However, Nefertiti's story does not end here, because the true transformation of Egypt, the political shifts, the religious turmoil, and the collapse of an entire belief system took place behind the closed gates of Akhetaten, far from the public eye. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's rule was not only a religious revolution, it was an administrative and artistic revolution as well. The Amarna period introduced a completely new way of depicting the royal family. Intimate scenes, elongated figures, exaggerated facial features, and moments of affection between parents and children. For the first time in Egyptian history, the royal family was shown in daily life, sitting together, playing with their daughters, or worshiping Aten as a united household. This shift was shocking for the Egyptian elite. Kings were supposed to be distant, divine, untouchable. But in Akhetaten, the ruler appeared human, fragile, emotional, almost vulnerable. Art historians still debate whether these exaggerated depictions were symbolic, religious, or medical. Some believe Akhenaten suffered from a genetic disorder that affected his appearance. Others claim the art style was intentional, meant to highlight Aten's perfect light, shining through imperfect human forms. Regardless of the reason, the Amarna style remains one of the most unusual artistic movements in ancient history. The city of Akhetaten itself was also unlike any other Egyptian settlement. Built rapidly and without the centuries-long refinement seen in cities like Thebes, it was designed with a single purpose: to honor Aten. Wide avenues connected temples with open courtyards. Administrative buildings faced the sunrise. Palaces featured windows designed to let sunlight flood into the throne room. Even household altars were placed in locations where dawnlight could reach them. Life in the new city centered entirely on the royal family. Priests, scribes, craftsmen, and foreign envoys all lived under the direct gaze of the king. The city's records show an international environment. Letters from Babylonian, Hittite, and Mitanni rulers, negotiations about royal marriages, and pleas for military help from allies who felt abandoned during Akhenaten's religious obsession. As Akhetaten expanded, the rest of Egypt began to contract. The treasury was drained. Military support weakened. Border regions were left vulnerable. Akhenaten's intense focus on religion prevented him from responding to foreign threats. Egyptian vassal states in the Levant begged for assistance, sending desperate messages recorded today in the famous Amarna letters. Many of these cities fell, and Egypt's influence shrank dramatically. Meanwhile, inside Akhetaten, tension between the Aten priesthood and the Amun priesthood grew dangerously high. Akhenaten confiscated temple wealth, removed Amun's name from inscriptions, and attempted to erase the god from cultural memory. Sculptures were smashed, texts were destroyed, and centuries-old traditions were rewritten overnight. The Amun priesthood, once the backbone of Egyptian religious life, now became a silent but powerful opposition force. By the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, cracks in the royal court had become impossible to hide. Egypt was weakening. Foreign enemies were gaining ground. The old priesthood was waiting patiently for its chance to strike back. Inside the palace, tragedy continued. After the death of their daughter Mekhetaten, inscriptions also mention other royal women who suddenly vanished from records. It is unclear whether they died, were married off, or were removed from political life. But these disappearances coincided with the first signs of Nefertiti's own withdrawal from public ceremonies. Some scholars believe Nefertiti fell out of favor. Others think she became co-ruler and simply adopted a new identity. The most debated possibility is that she reappeared as Smenkhkare, ruling either alongside Akhenaten or after him. Adding to this mystery is the so-called Dakamunzu letter, sent to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma. In this letter, an Egyptian queen wrote, "My husband is dead. I have no son. They say you have many sons. Send me one, and he shall become my husband and rule Egypt. I will never take a servant of mine and make him my husband." This was a shocking request. No Egyptian queen had ever asked for a foreign prince to take the throne. If the writer was Nefertiti, then this was the most daring political move in Egyptian history. What happened next was even more dramatic. The Hittite king agreed. He sent his son Zananza to Egypt, but the prince never arrived. He was murdered on the way, likely by Egyptian nobles outraged at the possibility of a foreign ruler. This event triggered severe conflict between the Hittites and Egyptians, further destabilizing the region. Shortly afterward, Akhenaten died, possibly in his early 30s. With the throne in chaos, the young Tutankhamun became pharaoh. Influenced by advisors and priests, he quickly reversed Akhenaten's reforms. Temples of Aten were abandoned and dismantled. The city of Akhetaten, once the center of a new world, was evacuated. Workers smashed statues, tore down stelae, and erased the names of Akhenaten and his family. The Aten revolution evaporated almost overnight. As Egypt struggled to rebuild, Nefertiti's fate remained unrecorded. Where she died, where she was buried, and whether she ever ruled the country in her own name. None of it is known with certainty. But Borchart's discovery in 1912 changed everything. The bust of Nefertiti, preserved astonishingly well beneath layers of desert dust, confronted the modern world with a face that seemed impossibly alive. Her high cheekbones, harmonic features, and serene expression revived her presence after more than 3 millennia of silence. That sculpture restored Nefertiti not only to history, but to global memory. And perhaps most beautifully, it ensured that, despite political failure, lost tombs, and shattered monuments, her image remained immortal long after her world had vanished. The rapid abandonment of Akhenaten was not merely the evacuation of a capital, it was the erasure of an entire era. In the eyes of the Egyptians, the Aten religion was not just a failed reform. It was a disruption that weakened the country, disturbed the traditional order, and even threatened the divine balance. Therefore, the process that began after Akhenaten's death was seen not only as a political reversal, but also as a deliverance movement. Akhenaten became one of the symbolic centers of this restoration. The suddenness of the city's abandonment is supported by archaeological findings. In pottery workshops, vessels were left half-finished. Stone figures, carefully shaped by sculptors, were abandoned mid-work. Molds filled with clay were never fired. In the workers' homes, partially consumed food was found. All of these point to people leaving the city in haste. In some of the city's rooms, doors were found open and belongings remained undisturbed. This indicates a mass abandonment rarely seen in Egyptian history. This urgency was not only political, but also fueled by religious anger. The sun rays engraved on the walls of Aten temples were smashed. Stone platforms belonging to priests' ritual spaces were removed. Depictions of the Aten disk were chiseled away. These acts of destruction were intentional, because for the Egyptians, anything that disrupted the traditional order had to be eliminated. The Aten religion was never to return. The destruction in Amarna was not limited to the temples. The faces of reliefs depicting the royal family were deliberately carved out. In Egyptian art, destroying a face meant erasing the person from immortality. It had the same effect as removing the person's name. In other words, the Egyptians sought to erase not only Akhenaten, but his entire family from history. This is why many depictions from the Amarna period have missing faces, and in some places, names have been scraped off the stone. This process of destruction raises further questions about Nefertiti's fate. If Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh after Akhenaten's death, why were her traces erased in the same way? If she was the target of an uprising, why were there no records left of her death? Or if she took on a male identity and ruled as Smenkhkare, why was this brief reign also erased from history? One of the theories about Nefertiti's disappearance suggests that she may have been targeted in an internal palace conflict. The growing dissatisfaction with the Aten religion was not only spreading among the public, but also within the palace and the military. Akhenaten's sidelining of traditional priests, weakening of the economic structure, and neglect of foreign policy had deepened the country's crises. As the symbolic face of the reforms, Nefertiti may have become the focus of this anger. Another, more dramatic theory suggests that Nefertiti was exiled. Some archaeologists interpret certain reliefs from Akhenaten's final years as indications that Nefertiti had been distanced from the palace. According to this interpretation, she may have fallen out of favor due to internal dynastic struggles and been removed from the city. However, this theory also lacks certainty, as the excavations in Amarna reveal no direct evidence of her exile. The Smenkhare theory is perhaps the most striking. The facial features in depictions of Smenkhare's short reign resemble Nefertiti, leading many scholars to support this view. Furthermore, the portrayal of a pharaoh wearing attire similar to that of female figures in Aten temples suggests that Nefertiti may have assumed a male form to continue the Aten order. The fact that gender and power roles during the Amarna period often broke away from traditional patterns also makes this view plausible. Yet all of these theories share a common point. Nefertiti's fate remains one of the greatest mysteries in history. Every theory written about her generates new debates, but none provides a definitive answer. With the collapse of Akhenaten, Egypt regained its traditional gods. The Amun priesthood regained its former power. The temple economy became functional again, and Thebes once more became the religious and political center. This return restored Egypt's religious system for millennia, but the traces of the Aten period had unknowingly left a deep impact on Egyptian art, architecture, and thought. The discoveries made by modern archaeologists in Amarna reveal the scale of this influence. The houses, workshops, palace remains, and temple structures uncovered in the city confirm that the Amarna period was a radical break not only politically, but also culturally. The unfinished statues and colorful pigments found in the workshop of the royal sculptor Thutmose clearly show the artistic experimentation of the era. The most significant find from these excavations is undoubtedly the bust of Nefertiti. This bust has become a subject of immense curiosity, not only for historians, but for the global public. The face of a woman became the symbol of one of the most controversial periods in history. The relationship between Nefertiti's beauty and her political power remains a topic of interest among art historians today. The debate over whether the bust is idealized or realistic further demonstrates how mysterious her life truly was. The transport of the bust to Germany is a controversy in itself. Claims that Borchardt labeled the bust as an unimportant plaster model in the excavation reports, thus allowing it to be taken to Germany, have persisted for years. The Egyptian government has repeatedly demanded the bust's return, but the Berlin Egyptian Museum argues that they are preserving the artifact as world cultural heritage. Today, when millions of people travel to Berlin and come face to face with Nefertiti's likeness, they are not merely seeing a sculpture, they are seeing Akhenaten's radical religious reforms, the rise and fall of Amarna, the uncertain fate of a queen, and one of the greatest confrontations with traditional order in history. Nefertiti's story does not end with a definitive conclusion. Neither her place of death nor the circumstances of her rule are known. But her face has been immortalized in the elegant lines of the bust. The astonishment felt by the hands that lifted her from the desert is still felt by all who encounter the artifact today. The lost life of the queen endures as one of the greatest mysteries in history. Tutankhamun's story begins at the very heart of one of the most dramatic turning points in ancient Egyptian history. He was not born a pharaoh, nor was it ever expected that he would one day ascend to the throne. But fate pushed him into the center of one of the most controversial dynasties in history, during a time when a collapsed order needed to be rebuilt. Although the name Tutankhamun is now associated with his magnificent golden mask, his life was actually a fragile attempt at restoring stability after chaos. Tutankhamun was likely born toward the end of the Akhenaten period, around the 1340s BCE. The name he was given at birth was Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of Aten. This name clearly shows that Egypt was ruled by the monotheistic Aten religion at the time he was born. Growing up during the peak of Akhenaten's radical reforms, Tutankhamun had no idea he would become a key figure in the transformation awaiting his country. For decades, the identity of his father was debated. Genetic analyses have largely confirmed that Akhenaten was indeed Tutankhamun's father. His mother, identified in the same genetic studies as the young lady, was likely one of Akhenaten's full sisters. This explains why Tutankhamun may have had a naturally weak constitution. Because royal families in ancient Egypt frequently intermarried, many hereditary disorders were passed down through generations. Tutankhamun spent his childhood in Amarna, the city of Akhetaten. This city, built by his father Akhenaten in dedication to Aten, was the center of the new religious order. Wide courtyards, open-roof temples, and structures designed specifically to let sunlight stream directly inside formed the backdrop of Tutankhamun's earliest memories. Palace life was lively, with Akhenaten and Nefertiti's 6 daughters, other royal members, foreign envoys, and priests all living within the city. But beneath this seemingly bright childhood atmosphere lay deep fragility. Outside Amarna, Egypt was on the verge of collapse due to Akhenaten's policies. Vassal states were pleading for military support, borders were weakening, and the Amun priesthood was quietly waiting for an opportunity to return to power. Amid all this tension, young Tutankhamun continued his life in the shadows of the palace, unaware that he was being prepared for a future that would shape his destiny. After Akhenaten's death, the throne entered a brief period of uncertainty. Smenkhkare's extremely short reign left almost no trace behind. A power vacuum emerged within the palace. At the center of this vacuum, a 9-year-old child was placed on the throne. Tutankhamun. A child of this age could not rule a country. Therefore, the true rulers of Egypt were 2 powerful figures, Vizier I and General Horemheb. I had been an influential statesman even during the Akhenaten period and had strong ties to the royal family. Horemheb, on the other hand, was a powerful military leader determined to restore security and re-establish the old order. These 2 men created a shadow government around the young king. Shortly after his ascension, the most critical decision in Egypt's recent history was made. Tutankhamun's name was changed to Tutankhamun. This change was not symbolic. It represented a complete political and religious shift. Aten was no longer exalted. Amun was once again honored. The old gods returned, and the temples reopened. This decision signaled the restoration of long-suppressed priestly power. The people welcomed this shift because the Aten period was remembered with hardship and instability. The early years of Tutankhamun's reign were dedicated entirely to rebuilding order. Old temples were repaired, the Amun cult regained strength, and Thebes once again became the religious center. It was a kind of national healing process. But this restoration was not driven by the young king's own will. It was orchestrated by I and Horemheb. Tutankhamun was physically frail. Scientific analyses show that he had a congenital foot deformity and needed a cane to walk. The more than 130 canes found in his tomb provide powerful archaeological evidence of this condition. In addition, scoliosis, immune system problems, and parasite-related diseases made his life difficult. Despite these challenges, he symbolically led his country toward restored stability during his short time on the throne. Tutankhamun's childhood ascension made palace politics even more complicated. To strengthen his influence over the royal family, I married the young king to his own daughter, Ankhesenamun. This marriage was intended to reinforce dynastic ties and secure A's political power. Ankhesenamun was one of Akhenaten and Nefertiti's daughters, meaning Tutankhamun was married to his own stepsister. This was typical of dynastic politics at the time. Tutankhamun's reforms were not limited to temples and religion. Egypt's weakened foreign policy also had to be rebuilt. Due to Akhenaten's neglect, Egypt's influence in the Levant had drastically declined. During Tutankhamun's reign, efforts were made to re-establish diplomatic connections and restore Egypt's standing abroad. However, these efforts were cut short by the young king's premature death. Tutankhamun's health continued to deteriorate. While palace physicians tried to treat his illnesses, Egypt's future grew increasingly uncertain. His exact cause of death remains unknown. Some theories propose that an infection weakened him. Others suggest that a leg fracture caused fatal complications. Theories of poisoning or assassination have been largely ruled out by modern research. After roughly 9 years on the throne, Tutankhamun died at the age of 18 or 19, plunging Egypt into deep mourning. Despite his brief reign, he had restored the country's traditional order, brought back its ancient gods, and created balance out of chaos. Tutankhamun's brief reign was one of the periods in which Egypt's efforts to rise again were most visible. Despite his young age, the decisions made during his rule affected not only his own era, but the fate of the centuries that followed. Every action taken in this period aimed to fill the void created by Akhenaten's destructive reforms and restore the country to its traditional course. However, this process progressed through the guidance of powerful statesmen around the young king rather than his own wishes. Most of the decrees issued in the early years of Tutankhamun's reign were corrective measures aimed at reversing previous actions. The Amun temples that had been closed during the Amarna period were reopened. The priests returned to their duties. The damaged temple economy was revived. The Amun priesthood regained the power it had held for centuries almost instantly. This transformation was welcomed by the majority of the population because the Aten religion had made daily life difficult and caused many festivals, rituals, and traditions to disappear. The return of Amun was, in a sense, a period of collective relief. During this time, Tutankhamun became the symbol of the nation's renewal efforts. Inscriptions carved on palace walls and monuments emphasized that he was the king who restored the country to its former beauty. Yet in reality, it was Ai and Horemheb who directed these reforms. The young king was likely only healthy enough to intervene in a small portion of state affairs directly. Although Tutankhamun's palace life appeared magnificent from the outside, inside the palace there was a constant struggle with serious health problems. Numerous scientific analyses have revealed that the young king suffered from both physical deformities and chronic illnesses. DNA analyses showed that he carried malaria parasites, while bone scans confirmed that a fracture in his leg had occurred before his death. Whether this fracture was the result of an accident or another incident remains a topic of debate. It is known that Tutankhamun needed a cane to walk. One of the reasons for this was a congenital deformity called clubfoot, which caused one of his feet to curve inward. Therefore, he needed special support during palace walks, rituals, and ceremonies. Although pharaohs were considered divine, Tutankhamun's physical weakness prevented him from influencing the military side of the state. Thus, the country's direction was largely left to his advisors. However, the king's frail health did not diminish his importance within the palace. On the contrary, his symbolic significance increased even more. Tutankhamun was seen as the living proof of the return of the old order. For the public, his youth symbolized hope for the future of the nation. For the priests, it represented the divine approval of the restored traditions. During this period, Ankhesenamun's role was also noteworthy. The young queen was not only a supportive wife to Tutankhamun, but also an influential figure in palace politics. Having grown up as the daughter of Nefertiti, she had strong diplomatic abilities. Additionally, As someone who had personally witnessed the religious transformations of Akhenaten's era, she served as an important bridge in the reorganization of the state. It is believed that Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun had children, but the two small mummified fetuses found in their tomb indicate that they were unable to leave behind a healthy heir. Scientists think that the two babies died before or during birth due to genetic disorders. This situation once again reveals the long-term consequences of dynastic inbreeding. One of the biggest problems in the palace was the uncertainty surrounding the future of the throne. Since Tutankhamun was known to be unhealthy and his children had not survived, a secret power struggle had begun between Ai and Horemheb. Horemheb held military power and dreamed of becoming pharaoh in the future. Ai, despite his advanced age, tried to maintain his political influence by using his close ties with the royal family. In the shadow of this rivalry, the young king's influence on foreign policy remained limited. Efforts were made to restore Egypt's influence in the Levant, but the void left by the Amarna period was too deep. The Hittites had grown stronger. Most of Egypt's allies had been absorbed into enemy territories, and the political balance in the region had completely changed. Tutankhamun's reign is remembered as a period in which the lost power in foreign policy could not be regained. However, Tutankhamun was a beloved figure in the eyes of the people. The return of the old gods was associated with his name. During temple ceremonies, priests prayed for the young king. The public hoped for a peaceful future under his rule. It is recorded that on the rare occasions when the king left the palace or attended rituals, he was greeted with great affection by the people. Despite his short life, Tutankhamun also left a mark in the artistic and architectural fields. The radical style of Amarna art was abandoned, and the traditional Egyptian artistic understanding was restored. Under the king's orders, many temples were rebuilt, and significant restorations were carried out, especially in the Karnak temple. This process was part of Egypt's collective effort to erase the memory of the Aten period. As palace intrigues increased, the young king's health declined further. He needed more support while walking and participated in fewer ceremonies. Despite the physician's efforts, Tutankhamun's body weakened. Rumors began circulating within the palace that he might not survive. As tensions rose, the political structure also became increasingly unstable. The rivalry between Ai and Horemheb could no longer be concealed. Both were planning who would take the throne after the young king's death, and the palace was under close scrutiny every day. The fact that the young king had not produced an heir made Egypt's future even more uncertain. And one day, the fear whispered in the palace corridors became reality. Tutankhamun succumbed to illness. After Tutankhamun's death, Egypt did not only lose a young king, it entered a period in which political balances completely shifted, and the throne was thrown into uncertainty. Dying at only around 18 to 19 years old, Tutankhamun left behind neither an heir nor a strong dynastic legacy. This situation turned the ongoing internal power struggle within the palace into an open conflict. Following his death, the king's funeral preparations were rushed. Normally, preparation for a pharaoh's tomb took many years, but because Tutankhamun died suddenly, there was little time available. Therefore, the tomb chamber used for the king was actually designed for a lower-ranking member of the royal family rather than a pharaoh. Archaeologists today clearly show that this was a quickly chosen structure. The small size and hastiness of the tomb. Tutankhamun's tomb is remarkably small compared to the magnificent and massive tombs of other pharaohs. This fact confirms that the young king's death was unexpected. Even the frescoes on the walls of the tomb appear to have been painted in haste. In some sections, artists painted over wet plaster and could not complete the intricate details. However, The small size of the tomb does not mean that its treasures were insignificant. On the contrary, Tutankhamun's tomb is one of the richest royal burials ever discovered. The palace had sent an extraordinary amount of valuable goods to elevate the young king's status and sanctify the religious restoration accomplished during his reign. The symbolism of the Golden Mask. Tutankhamun's Golden Mask is one of the most famous artifacts of the ancient world. It is unmatched not only in aesthetic beauty, but also in symbolic meaning. The mask features traditional iconography representing the divine nature of the pharaoh. The cobra and vulture motifs on the forehead symbolize the unity of Upper and Lower Egypt. Inside the mask, there is a powerful spell written to protect the dead. This text is a prayer intended to help the king's soul pass peacefully into the afterlife. Modern research suggests that Nefertiti's name may have once been inscribed and later removed from the lower section of the mask. If this claim is true, the mask may have originally been prepared for another queen and later adapted for Tutankhamun. This possibility further illustrates the sudden political changes and lack of preparation during the Amarna period. The discovery of the tomb and Howard Carter's journey. The story of Tutankhamun after his death is just as fascinating as his life. For a long time, his tomb was overlooked by historians because Tutankhamun's era was considered a short transitional period defined primarily by reversing Akhenaten's religious revolution. Therefore, finding his tomb was not considered as valuable as locating other pharaonic graves. That is, until the year 1922. British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of determined work, made one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history on November 4, 1922. One step, then another, then a sealed door. Before telling anyone what lay behind it, Carter simply said, "Yes, wonderful things." What Carter saw was a nearly untouched royal tomb that had remained sealed for 3,000 years. The inside was filled with gold, lapis lazuli, obsidian, and precious stones. This discovery caused worldwide excitement and instantly turned Tutankhamun into one of the most famous pharaohs in history. Why the tomb remained undisturbed. The excellent preservation of Tutankhamun's tomb is the result of several coincidences. The tomb was located away from the main pathways of the Valley of the Kings. It was overshadowed by the larger tombs of other pharaohs. Its entrance was covered by debris from later tomb excavations. Unlike larger royal tombs, it attracted less attention from tomb robbers. All these factors ensured that Tutankhamun's tomb remained nearly untouched for thousands of years. Mysteries behind his death. Tutankhamun's cause of death remains uncertain. Researchers focus on three main theories. 1. Accident and leg fracture. The fracture in the king's left leg may have caused fatal complications through infection. 2. Genetic diseases. His immune system may have been weakened due to hereditary issues caused by dynastic inbreeding. 3. Malaria. DNA tests have detected signs of malaria parasites, indicating that the king was vulnerable to illness. Aside from these, assassination theories were debated for many years, but have largely lost credibility today. Ankhesenamun's plea. The Dakamunzu affair. What Tutankhamun's wife, Ankhesenamun, experienced after his death sparked a major crisis in Egyptian history. The young queen desperately tried to avoid being forced to marry Ai, or Horemheb. It is believed that she secretly sent a letter to the Hittite king. This letter is known as the Dakamunzu letter in history. "My husband is dead. I have no son. I will not marry a servant of mine. Send me one of your sons. Let him become my husband, and he shall be the king of Egypt." This was an unprecedented request in Egyptian history. The Hittite king accepted the offer and sent his son, but the prince died before reaching Egypt. This event pushed the two great empires into conflict, and the long shadows of the Amarna period continued to influence Egyptian politics for years. The legacy of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's legacy is not founded on great military victories or a long reign. What immortalizes him is that despite his short life, he restored Egypt to its traditional order. Akhenaten's experimental religious system had collapsed. Amun had risen to power once again, and Egypt began rebuilding itself to reclaim its authority on the world stage. But most importantly, Tutankhamun's tomb is considered one of the most valuable archaeological treasures in human history. His name has lived on not as a mighty pharaoh, but as the symbol of one of the greatest discoveries ever made, Ramses II. Not only one of the most famous pharaohs of ancient Egypt, but also a ruler whose name has been engraved into the memory of history and echoed for centuries. The titles used to describe him are countless: Ramses the Great, the Warrior King, the Builder King, Egypt's most powerful pharaoh. But perhaps the most important one is this: Ramses II managed to become a legend in his own time, and that legend has never faded for thousands of years. His story is filled not only with wars, temples, and treaties, but also with extraordinary statecraft, masterful propaganda, and flawless management of power. The continuation of a dynasty, the son of Seti, Juan Ramses II, was born around 1303 BCE as the son of Seti I, a powerful military commander and disciplined state administrator. Seti I was one of the most important kings of the 19th dynasty and played a major role in stabilizing the country's internal affairs. For this reason, Ramses was raised from a young age as the future leader of the empire. Ramses's childhood was filled with grandeur and intense training. At just 10 years old, his father appointed him Prince Regent. This was an extraordinary event for the time, because heirs in Egypt were usually prepared for this role when approaching adulthood. Ramses's early appointment can be explained by Seti's recognition of the great potential within him. This early assignment allowed Ramses II to gain experience in both military and political fields at a very young age. The early training of young Ramses' childhood for a pharaoh-to-be wasn't simply luxury and comfort. Ramses II received training from a very early age in archery and chariot handling, spear and sword techniques, state administration, priesthood, and legal order, hieroglyphic writing and religious texts, temple rituals, and royal traditions. He had to master many different fields: war, politics, diplomacy, and religion. Because in Egypt, the pharaoh was considered both the king on earth and the earthly representative of the gods. Ramses II was aware of this enormous burden, and even at a young age, he attracted attention with his charisma. According to palace records, he was tall, strong, and quite charismatic. He was loved among the soldiers, and the priestly class admired his disciplined nature. First, battles in the shadow of Seti. I frequently launched campaigns to reclaim the territories Egypt had lost in Syria and Palestine. Ramses joined these expeditions as a young commander. This was the period in which he gained his first military experiences. Reliefs depict scenes of young Ramses standing beside his father in the war chariot. This image is common in ancient Egyptian art, the young prince firing arrows from a chariot, while his father looks at him with pride. These experiences gave Ramses skills in military strategies, managing an army, understanding enemy tactics, soldier psychology, diplomacy, and threat assessment. Therefore, when Ramses II ascended the throne, he was not simply a king. He appeared before his people as a natural-born military leader. The ascension to the throne. Upon Seti III's death, Ramses II ascended the throne around 1279 BCE. He was about 24 to 25 years old. Yet despite his young age, he became ruler as a leader who was already highly experienced in state affairs. He inherited Seti II's long-standing policies and immediately began laying the foundations of his own era. Ramses II's accession wasn't just a change in leadership. It marked the beginning of a new era for Egypt. Historians often refer to this period as the Golden Age of Ramses. Ramses II's vision for the state. When Ramses II took power, he developed a vision aimed at strengthening his country both internally and externally. This vision rested on three pillars. 1. Military power, to expand Egypt's territories and reclaim its former strength. 2. Massive construction projects, to honor the gods, impress the people, and immortalize his own name. 3. Propaganda and royal image, to portray himself as the invincible king. These three elements explain why Ramses II is remembered as the Great. Ramses II's mastery of propaganda. Ramses II had one striking quality. He knew exactly how to turn himself into a legend. Many pharaohs built temples, but what Ramses II did was different. On every structure he built, he left a clear message. I am the eternal king of Egypt, chosen by the gods, protector of my people, destroyer of my enemies. The Karnak Temple, the Luxor Temple, and especially the massive statues at Abu Simbel are concrete examples of this propaganda. In these monuments, Ramses II is depicted, far larger than an ordinary pharaoh, with an imposing posture, standing or seated on a throne, shown alongside the god Ra-Horakhti. This wasn't just a religious symbol. It was a consciously crafted perception among the people. Ramses was not merely a king. He was a living god. Diplomacy under the shadow of war. Under Ramses II's rule, Egypt was powerful, but the surrounding geography was never truly calm. Especially to the north, the Hittite Empire stood as Egypt's greatest rival. Even during his youth, this rivalry was evident. His father Seti I had fought the Hittites and reclaimed some territories. When Ramses II took the throne, he inherited this long-standing conflict. This rivalry would eventually lead to the most famous battle in Egyptian history, the Battle of Kadesh. But before reaching Kadesh, it is important to see how Ramses II prepared his internal administration, reorganizing Egypt's internal structure. As soon as he ascended the throne, Ramses II reorganized the bureaucracy. He established a new balance among the priesthood, the army, and palace administration. He implemented the following: strengthened temple economics, reinforced the loyalty of the priestly class, modernized the military structure, reorganized the tax system, launched new projects for the Nile floods and agricultural regions. These reforms restored Egypt's economic and social stability. Ramses II's family and queens. Ramses II's family life was also quite remarkable. His most famous wife was Nefertari, known for her beauty and diplomatic influence. Ramses even built a special temple for her at Abu Simbel. Ramses II had hundreds of children, many wives, a massive royal household. This strengthened both his political power and his social status. One of the most critical turning points of Ramses II's reign is undoubtedly the Battle of Kadesh. But this battle is far more than a single confrontation. It is the culmination of the long-standing rivalry between Egypt and the Hittites, the struggle for regional dominance between two superpowers, and the peak of Ramses II's personal ambition. In this part, we will examine in detail the background of the Battle of Kadesh. Ramses's preparations, the outbreak of the war, and the impact of this conflict on the ancient world. Rising tensions with the Hittites. When Ramses II ascended the throne, Egypt's northern territories had long been unstable. The region of Syria held vital importance for both Egypt and the Hittite Empire. Major trade routes intersected there. It was one of the central hubs of the Bronze Age. City-states frequently shifted allegiances, competing to fall under the influence of one of the two great powers. Therefore, any conflict over Syria directly brought Egypt and the Hittites face to face. During Seti I's reign, Egypt had regained some territories such as Kadesh and Amurru, but the Hittites never accepted this. The struggle in the region continued even before Ramses II took the throne. Ramses's war preparations. When Ramses II came to power, he was young but ambitious. In the early years of his reign, he initiated a major military restructuring to strengthen the northern border. He organized his army into 4 main divisions: Amun Division, under his direct command; Ra Division, Ta Division, Seth Division. Each division consisted of nearly 4,000 soldiers and about 500 chariots. This structure formed one of the most disciplined and well-organized armies of the time. Ramses's goal was clear: to capture Kadesh once and for all and show the Hittites the might of Egypt. The march toward the Syrian campaign. Around 1274 BCE, Ramses II issued a great campaign order. With his army, he marched north from the Nile Delta. This march lasted for weeks, and Ramses was greeted with great enthusiasm in every city. Because Ramses was a master of propaganda, he strengthened his royal image even during the campaign. On walls, he had inscriptions carved such as, "Great Ramses is the one who makes all foreign nations tremble. No enemy standing before him can remain upright." These words were not only propaganda, they were also a source of morale for the army. The first trap near Kadesh. When Ramses II reached the vicinity of Kadesh, a great surprise awaited him. Hittite King Muwatalli had been tracking the movements of the Egyptian army for days. Because Ramses's previous campaigns had been swift and bold, Muwatalli understood that he would act early. As Ramses's army approached the south of Kadesh, 2 Bedouin spies were captured. These spies had been sent by the Hittite king. They told Ramses the following lie: "The Hittite army is far away near Aleppo. There is no one in Kadesh. You can easily capture the city." The young and ambitious Ramses believed this news. This would become the first major mistake that determined the course of the war: the great assault at the gates of Kadesh. While Ramses set up camp with the Amun Division, the Ra, Ta, and Seth divisions that were supposed to follow were still on the road. The Hittites were waiting precisely for this moment. Muwatalli mobilized his 2,500 heavy chariots hidden behind the river. The Hittite chariots bypassed the Egyptians from behind and attacked the Ra division. The Ra division was caught completely off guard. Most of the soldiers scattered, and the rest fled toward Ramses' camp. When the panicked cries of the fleeing soldiers reached Ramses, the young pharaoh realized the threat he was facing: Ramses's lone resistance. The most famous scene of the Battle of Kadesh is here. Egyptian sources depict Ramses as a hero, fighting like an army by himself. Ramses leapt into his chariot and began raining arrows even as he was surrounded by Hittite chariots. This moment has been carved repeatedly into Egyptian temple walls. In the texts it says, "The king's strength was like the breath of Amun. His enemies scattered before him like leaves drifting in a sandstorm." The reality was likely more complex, but it is certain that Ramses fought with great determination on the battlefield. The remnants of the Amun division and the retreating Ra soldiers regrouped around Ramses. This was the critical moment that changed the fate of the battle. Egypt's reinforcements arrived. Just when it seemed that the Hittites would seize the camp, from the south, the Nairan troops, the military allies that Ramses had brought from northern Syria, finally arrived. These troops hit the Hittite chariots from behind. Suddenly, the Hittite formation broke apart. Hundreds of Hittite chariots fleeing toward the Orontes River crashed into each other and retreated in disarray. Mu'attali was forced to withdraw his army across the river. A battle without a winner. At the end of the Battle of Kadesh, neither side achieved a decisive victory. The Egyptians proclaimed Ramses's heroism. The Hittite record stated that the Egyptians retreated. Therefore, the Battle of Kadesh is known in history as a war without a winner, but with an everlasting impact. For Ramses, victory propaganda was inevitable. When he returned to Egypt, he had inscriptions written on the walls. "I defeated thousands of enemies alone. Amun was with me." These scenes were carved into every corner of temples. Through this propaganda, Ramses became almost a divine figure in the eyes of the people. But in truth, Ramses knew this. The inconclusive outcome at Kadesh had not ended the Egyptian-Hittite rivalry. This situation would later lead to the creation of history's first written peace treaty. The Battle of Kadesh was not only a military struggle for Ramses II, it was also one of the most important steps in consolidating his power. Although both sides declared victory after the battle, Ramses II knew very well that this conflict had not completely ended the tension with the Hittites. Egypt's northern borders were still vulnerable, and lasting peace in the Levant region was essential for economic stability. The first written peace treaty in history. About 16 years after the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses II took a decisive step and signed the first known written peace treaty in history with the Hittite king Hattusili III. This document, known today as the Kadesh Peace Treaty, appears almost identically in both Egyptian and Hittite archives. The important clauses of the treaty were as follows. Neither state would attack the other. They would assist each other against external threats. Fugitives would be returned mutually. Stability would be ensured in the border regions. This treaty not only symbolized peace between two superpowers, but also demonstrated Ramses II's diplomatic brilliance. Even today, copies of the treaty are displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. This peace was a long-awaited breath of relief for Egypt. Ramses II could now direct all his energy toward domestic development, architecture, and ideological projects. Ramses II's storm of construction. It is no coincidence that Ramses II is remembered in history as the Great Builder. Hundreds of temples, statues, monuments, obelisks, and city projects across Egypt were built during his reign. The purpose of these projects was very clear: to honor the gods, to showcase Egypt's wealth, to immortalize Ramses II's name. Many of his structures that still stand today are proof of the immense power the pharaoh wielded during his lifetime. Abu Simbel, an empire declaration carved into stone Ramses. The second's most famous work is undoubtedly the Abu Simbel temples. Carved into the rocky cliffs of Nubia, this grand temple is unique both architecturally and ideologically. At the entrance of the Great Temple stand 4 colossal statues of Ramses, each approximately 20 meters tall. These statues portray the pharaoh not only as a king, but as a being on the same level as the gods. Their majesty proves that Ramses's power reached even the farthest regions of Egypt. Inside are depictions of major gods such as Ra-Horakhti, Amun-Ra, and Ptah. Ramses's representations within the temple, carry a clear message. I am not the son of the gods. I am the god himself. This structure was designed not only to impress the Nubian population, but also to maintain psychological control over Egypt's southern borders. The Temple of Love, built for Nefertari. One of Ramses II's most special architectural achievements is the Temple of Nefertari. Also known as the Small Abu Simbel, this temple was dedicated to Ramses's great love, Queen Nefertari. It was extremely rare for a pharaoh to build a temple for his wife. Moreover, the fact that Nefertari's statues at the temple entrance were made the same size as Ramses's is proof of how important she was in his eyes. In Egyptian art, no figure other than the king was ever made the same size as him. Therefore, Nefertari's statue is regarded as an immortal expression of Ramses's love for his queen. The Ramesseum, the king's palace. Dedicated to immortality located in the Thebes region, the Ramesseum is a massive temple complex built for Ramses II's mortuary cult. On its walls are detailed depictions of the heroic scenes from the Battle of Kadesh, the Syrian campaigns, offerings made to the gods, royal ceremonies. The temple was also part of Ramses II's propaganda apparatus. The inscriptions here describe the pharaoh's power in an almost boundless tone. Ramses, the birth of a capital one of the greatest cities Ramses II built during his reign, was Ramses, meaning the city of Ramses. Located in the eastern Nile Delta, this city became the headquarters of the new army, the area where the royal palace was located, a strategic point near the Hittite border. One of the most modern cities in Egypt. With its wide avenues, massive warehouses, chariot production areas, and the pharaoh's magnificent palace, Ramses represented the peak of Ramses II's power. Ramses II and Nefertari, two faces of a legend. Nefertari likely held the most special place in Ramses II's life. Her intelligence, linguistic talent, and diplomatic skills granted her a significant role within the Egyptian court. Nefertari may have also played a diplomatic part in the peace treaty with the Hittites. The poems Ramses wrote for her demonstrate the magnitude of his love for his queen. On the walls of her tomb, Nefertari is described as she who shines like the sun, beloved of the gods. Her death marked the beginning of a long mourning period for Ramses II. He had one of the most elegant tombs in the Valley of the Queens built for her. This tomb is still considered one of the masterpieces of ancient Egyptian art. A 66-year reign, the longest-lived king in history. Ramses II ruled for approximately 66 years, a nearly unreachable record in the ancient world. This long reign was seen as a golden age by the people. As long as Ramses lived, there was stability, abundance, and enemies stayed far away from Egypt. Even in old age, he continued to rule his country. He attended ceremonies in Karnak and Luxor, supervised the placement of stone blocks, and presided over the priests' rituals. In his final years, he likely suffered from arthritis, spinal issues, and dental problems. But despite all these ailments, Ramses II was never remembered as a weak figure. The death of Ramses II and his mummy. When Ramses II died around 1213 BCE, all of Egypt mourned. His body was placed in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings with magnificent ceremonies. On the walls of his tomb were scenes depicting the pharaoh's union with the gods. When his mummy was discovered centuries later, scientists could still observe his strong physique. Tall, broad-shouldered, remarkably sturdy for his time, his mummy is now displayed in Cairo and is one of the most visited artifacts. The secret of immortality, propaganda, or real power. If Ramses II is still remembered today as the greatest pharaoh, the reason is not singular. His legacy rests on three key pillars. 1. Military achievements, his determination at Kadesh, and his Syrian campaigns. 2. Peace and diplomacy. The world's first peace treaty. 3. Monuments, an imperial signature carved across all of Egypt together. These elements shape the immortality of Ramses II. Even today, when one looks at the colossal statues sitting at the entrance of Abu Simbel, the pharaoh's message can still be felt. I was here, and I will remain here. Cleopatra VII. Her name is written in history not merely as a queen, but with her intelligence, strategic abilities, political acumen, and extraordinary charisma. Known as the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra was not simply a ruler. She was a figure who influenced even the fate of Rome. Contrary to the shallow image created by Hollywood films, Cleopatra's power came from her intelligence, not her beauty. Her story is like a vast labyrinth, woven with intrigues, inter-imperial struggles, betrayals, love affairs, and diplomacy. Now, we will step into this labyrinth one step at a time and reveal the real face of Cleopatra. The birth of a queen, the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE as a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty of Greek origin took control of Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great and ruled for nearly 3 centuries. So Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood. But what made her different was this. Cleopatra was the first Ptolemaic ruler who could speak the Egyptian language. This earned her great respect in the eyes of the people. Her learning of Egypt's culture, gods, rituals, and language distinguished her from other Ptolemaic rulers. The political struggles within the dynasty had begun shaping Cleopatra's fate at a very young age. A mind growing in the shadows of the palace. Cleopatra's childhood was not that of an ordinary princess. The power struggles within the palace, the succession conflicts among siblings, and the constant intrigue helped her develop political intelligence at an early age. Her education was extensive. Philosophy, rhetoric, and oratory, astronomy, mathematics, geography, medicine, linguistics. It is claimed she spoke Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin, and Ethiopian. Cleopatra was not only a queen-to-be, she was also one of the best educated women of her era. Most of what is said about her beauty is exaggerated. Ancient texts speak not of her beauty, but of her speaking ability and her voice that captivated people. Ascension to the throne and war with siblings. In 51 BCE, when her father Ptolemy XII died, Cleopatra was 18 years old. She inherited the throne together with her brother Ptolemy XIII. But this joint rule remained only on paper. The palace advisors and Ptolemaic factions were disturbed by Cleopatra's growing power. The advisors of Ptolemy XIII immediately began plotting to remove Cleopatra from the palace. Soon, Cleopatra was forced into exile due to political pressure, but she did not give up. From this moment on, 2 names would enter her life, names that would change the course of history. Julius Caesar, Marcus Antonius. But first, we must understand how Caesar entered her life. Julius Caesar's arrival in Egypt. In 48 BCE, after Caesar defeated Pompey Magnus in Greece, he pursued the fleeing Pompey all the way to Egypt. The supporters of Cleopatra's brother, seeking to gain Caesar's favor, killed Pompey and presented his head to Caesar as a gift. But Caesar was displeased. Pompey was an important Roman leader, and this act was seen as an insult to Caesar. This moment opened a door for Cleopatra. She returned from exile, entered the palace secretly, and made her legendary move. Cleopatra, inside the carpet. According to ancient sources, Cleopatra was smuggled into Caesar's palace, wrapped inside a carpet. This dramatic scene is still told as a legendary story today. When the carpet was opened and Caesar saw the young queen, he was deeply impressed. But this was not a simple romantic impression. Cleopatra's intelligence, her oratory skills, and her political insight deeply affected Caesar. And soon, a powerful political alliance formed between the two leaders. Cleopatra forged this alliance not only to reclaim her throne, but also to secure Egypt's future. The Nile Wars and the bloody struggle inside the palace. The alliance between Cleopatra and Caesar disturbed Cleopatra's brother Ptolemy, Thean, and his supporters. As a result, a civil war erupted within the palace. The battles fought along the Nile River entered history as the Nile Wars. Cleopatra and Caesar combined their forces and defeated her brother's army. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while trying to escape during the battle. Thus, Cleopatra reclaimed the throne. But this time, she had the full support of Rome behind her. The period of Cleopatra and Caesar. Ruling together, Cleopatra used Caesar's presence in Egypt not only as military support, but also as a cultural propaganda tool. Cleopatra had a son with Caesar, Caesarion Ptolemy XV. This gave Cleopatra a significant advantage in strengthening her ties with Rome. But in Rome, Caesar's increasing power created many enemies, and the assassination that would change the course of history occurred in 44 BCE. Cleopatra was in Rome when Caesar was stabbed. This news deeply shook her as it shook everyone. But for Cleopatra, the struggle was just beginning. The rise of Octavianus. A war begun with a pen. In Rome, Octavianus, recognized as Caesar's heir, began portraying the relationship between Antonius and Cleopatra as a betrayal of Rome. His propaganda included statements such as, "Antonius has become the slave of an Egyptian queen." "Rome's treasures have been laid at Cleopatra's feet." "Antonius has chosen Cleopatra over Rome." "The Queen of Egypt seeks to conquer Rome." This propaganda quickly turned the Roman public against Cleopatra, and eventually, Octavianus succeeded in convincing the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra and Antonius. From this point on, conflict between the two sides was inevitable. The road to Actium, Clash of Empires. In 32 BCE, Rome officially declared war on Antonius and Cleopatra. This was not merely a war between states. It was a struggle that would determine the future of Rome. The conflict between the Roman navy and the Cleopatra-Antonius alliance turned into the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Actium is considered one of the greatest naval battles of the ancient world. Cleopatra's fleet was powerful, but the tactics of Octavianus's commander Agrippa dramatically changed the course of the battle. In the end, Antonius and Cleopatra were forced to retreat to Alexandria. This retreat marked the beginning of the process that would lead to their downfall. Golem Dirt, Part 3, American English Translation. The defeat at Actium was not only the loss of a battle, it was the moment when the fate line of a civilization changed. The return of Antony and Cleopatra to Egypt was not like the journey of a victorious leader coming home. It was like the quiet and heavy steps of two people fleeing an approaching storm. When they arrived in Alexandria, the people of the city still supported them, but everyone was aware of the approaching end. There was very little Egypt could do against the power of Rome. While Cleopatra was considering the last strategies that could be applied against Rome, Antony was becoming more withdrawn day by day. The retreat at Actium had created a deep fracture in the soul of the powerful general. Antony had once been the commander who led the most disciplined armies in the world. But now all that power was lost in the shadow of Octavianus's Rome. Cleopatra's first move in Alexandria was to strengthen the city's defenses. Chains were stretched across the harbors, the walls were reinforced, and supplies were piled into storage buildings. But Cleopatra knew that it was almost impossible to resist Rome's army for long. These preparations were made more to buy time, perhaps for one last diplomatic move, but Octavianus was determined. This war was not opened merely against Antony and Cleopatra. It was a struggle carried out to secure the future of his own rule. Octavianus wanted to show that he had avenged Caesar, take complete control of Rome, and effectively end the Republican period. In 30 BCE, Octavianus's armies reached Alexandria. The city was quickly placed under siege. The Egyptian army could not withstand the advance of the Roman forces. Many soldiers either surrendered or deserted. Antony attempted one final resistance against Rome with his remaining troops, but it was clear that this effort would have no result. During this period, Cleopatra's most important concern was the future of her son Caesarion. As the biological son of Julius Caesar, Caesarion theoretically had a claim to the Roman throne. Octavianus would do whatever was necessary to eliminate this possibility. Cleopatra tried to secretly get her son out of Egypt to safety, but this attempt came too late. When Octavianus learned of the escape, he ordered Caesarion to be captured. The psychological collapse Antony experienced as the city fell is described in various ways in ancient sources. Some accounts say he received a false report that Cleopatra had died and therefore fell upon his own sword. Others claim he believed Cleopatra no longer trusted him and fell into despair. But the common point is this: Antony died in Cleopatra's arms after being brought to her mausoleum. According to what ancient historians wrote, Cleopatra's last time seeing Antony was a turning point for her. In her struggle against Rome, she was now completely alone. With Antony's death, Octavianus's victory was also finalized. Octavianus planned for Cleopatra to surrender and be taken to Rome as a slave. He intended to display her in a triumphal procession on the streets of Rome. This was the greatest form of humiliation experienced by enemy rulers in Roman tradition. For Cleopatra, this was unacceptable. She was a queen, a pharaoh, and pharaohs did not lose their honor, even when they were defeated by history. In her meeting with Octavianus, Cleopatra understood his plans. When Octavianus's intention to take her alive to Rome was confirmed, Cleopatra decided to determine her own end. Throughout her life, the queen had fought many battles, formed alliances with two great Roman leaders, and ruled as the last monarch of a dynasty more than 1,000 years old. But becoming a trophy, a spectacle in front of Rome, was not a fate she would accept. When Cleopatra returned to the mausoleum, she was accompanied by a few loyal servants. Historians describe her manner of death differently. Some sources say she was bitten by the famous Egyptian cobra, the asp. Others claim the poison was administered with a needle or hidden inside an ointment. But they all agree on the same point. Cleopatra chose her own death. It is said that her death was peaceful. Cleopatra's face was described as serene, and she is said to have died wearing her royal garments. Even in her death, there was theatrical elegance, just as there had been throughout her life. With her death, not only a queen, but an entire era came to an end. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries, but Cleopatra's death meant the complete end of this line. Octavianus declared Egypt a province of Rome and ordered the execution of Caesarion. This was the complete eradication of the dynasty. Egypt's transition to Roman administration changed the political balance of the ancient world. Rome was now the undisputed greatest power in the Mediterranean, and Octavianus would soon take the title of Augustus, becoming the first emperor of Rome. Thus, the Roman Empire was officially born. Cleopatra's life has become the subject of countless artworks, plays, novels, and films throughout the centuries. The emphasis placed on her beauty is only a small part of the story. What is truly remarkable is her intelligence, diplomatic skill, political strategy, and the courage she showed in times of crisis. Cleopatra succeeded in becoming not only one of the most powerful figures of Egypt, but of the entire world. Even today, historians continue to debate her. Some see her as a manipulator. Others describe her as a leader, a diplomat, a master of survival. But this is certain: Cleopatra is one of the most impressive female figures in history. Her story is not only about the fall of a kingdom, it is also the narrative of a person, a woman, a leader exerting her will over her own destiny. Her death was tragic, but it was her choice, and that choice transformed her name into a legend remembered for thousands of years. Even if Cleopatra's story ends here, the mark she left continues to live within world history. The wind of Alexandria still carries her whispers. The water of the Nile still remembers her shadow. And every time humanity recalls her name, it pays respect to one of the most powerful women in history. Daily life in ancient Egypt. Living by the rhythm of the Nile. The history of ancient Egypt is often remembered with the splendor of pharaohs, the massive bodies of pyramids, the eternity of gods, and the mystery of mummies. But behind those colossal structures, those divine stories, and that mythological world, there were millions of people quietly living their lives. These people woke up with the golden light of the morning sun, worked with the waters of the Nile, and when night fell, they climbed onto their rooftops to rest in the cool breeze. Ancient Egypt was not only the world of kings, it was also the world of farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, priests, children, and mothers. And now, we slowly descend to the banks of the Nile. This time, not to the palace of pharaohs, but to the real life flowing through the veins of Egypt. If you want to close your eyes, you may, because this episode is much calmer, much more introspective. This is a journey where we hear the daily breath of the ancient world. The Nile River, the heartbeat of a civilization. In ancient Egypt, the center of life was not the pyramids, nor the palaces. The real center was the Nile River itself. The flood cycle of the Nile determined both the calendar and the life order of the Egyptians. Every year between June and September, the Nile flooded and left behind rich silt that nourished agricultural land. This flood was so regular and so predictable that Egyptians even calculated their calendar according to it. When the flooding season arrived, people left their farming work and directed themselves to other tasks. For example, they worked on large construction projects, helped with temple repairs, engaged in state-directed labor. The construction of the pyramids, temples, and massive tomb complexes all stemmed from this period. So those magnificent structures that carried Egypt into the present day were actually the result of the natural cycle of the Nile. And with the receding of the Nile came a new season, the planting season. Farmers took their plows, drove oxen into the fields, and prepared the soil for planting. Then they planted barley, wheat, and flax. As spring approached, the harvest took place, rituals were performed, and the cycle began again. Life in Egypt continued with the rhythm of the Nile's breathing. Farmers, the silent backbone of Egypt. The largest social class in ancient Egypt was the farmers. The flour in the palace kitchen, the linen that wrapped mummies, the oil needed in temples, all were produced through their labor. A farmer's daily life began with the sunrise. With the first light of the morning, they went to the fields, plowed the soil, cleaned irrigation channels, and tended to crops. The Egyptians used water with such mastery that for hundreds of years no civilization established such an effective agricultural system. Diverting the Nile, digging small canals, storing water. These were ordinary tasks for them, but actually, engineering methods worthy of admiration. A farmer's home was quite simple. It was made of mud brick and designed to let in as little sunlight as possible. There were small ventilation holes on the roof to allow hot air to rise and escape. At night, they did not sleep in warm beds. They slept on rooftops, accompanied by cool breezes. Farmer families were large. Children helped in the fields, girls worked with their mothers on house chores, and boys learned to plow from a young age. In Egyptian society, professions were passed from generation to generation. The quiet streets, markets, and daily rituals of ancient Egypt. The daily life of ancient Egypt was not only made of fields, temples, or artisan villages. The most colorful, lively, human part of that life was the streets. Now we move toward the Nile-side towns, bazaars, narrow streets, and daily habits. Here, there is no splendor of pharaohs, but there is the breath of the people. The rhythm of the streets, children, animals, and people escaping the heat. The streets of ancient Egypt were usually narrow, shaded, and crowded. Because homes were built from mud brick, the streets easily became dusty, and when the wind blew, a thin yellow cloud rose into the air. The ones who ran most through these streets were children. Children ran with wooden toys, played games with small balls, made clay figurines, told each other stories. Another inhabitant of the streets was animals: goats, donkeys, cattle, dogs. The daily street life of Egypt had a harmony in which humans and animals intertwined. And the heat. Because of the rising temperatures during the day, people preferred shaded areas in the streets. At noon, the streets would fall silent for a while, and in the late afternoon, they would come alive again. Marketplaces, the crowded heart of Egypt. The markets were the busiest places in Egypt. We don't know which drew more people: the smell of fresh bread, the newly fried fish, or the incense-scented spices. Early in the morning, the markets came alive. Villagers brought their products, artisans displayed their crafted goods, and merchants sold items brought from distant regions. Among the items sold in the market were fish, grains, just vegetables, dates and figs, honey, linen cloth, small figurines, pottery. Shopping was done by bargaining. Money existed, of course, but bartering was also common. It was perfectly normal to get some bread in exchange for a pot. Markets were not only for shopping, but also served as communication centers. People coming from distant villages, rumors heard from the royal palace, announcements made in temples, all were talked about in the markets. Clothing, simplicity, and functionality. The people of ancient Egypt wore simple but functional clothing. Women, thin linen dresses, long drapes tied from the shoulder, simple jewelry and bracelets. Men, a short skirt-like linen shendi, bare upper body in hot weather, a thin cloak on cold nights. Linen was Egypt's most valuable fabric. It was lightweight and cool, making it the ideal material for the hot desert climate. The clothes of the wealthy were woven more finely, had a brighter white color, and were decorated with embroidery. The poor used thicker linen. Cleanliness was very important to Egyptians. Because of the hot climate, bathing several times a day was a common habit. Instead of soap, they used natron salt and plant oils. Jewelry, not just decoration, but a tool of belief in Egypt. Gold was not only a sign of wealth, it was also a symbol of sacredness. It was preferred because it represented the light of the sun, god Ra. Egyptians did not wear jewelry only to adorn themselves. Every piece of jewelry had a meaning, a protective power, a story. Ankh, the symbol of life. Jed, endurance and stability. Ujat Eye, Eye of Horus, protection from evil. Scarab, rebirth. Men wore jewelry as much as women. It is known that priests and soldiers also wore symbolic amulets. Scents and perfumes. The hidden art of Egypt. In ancient Egypt, perfume was important in the lives of both the wealthy and ordinary people. Egyptians used scents not only for beauty, but also in rituals, healing practices, and daily hygiene. Perfumes were typically prepared with myrtle, lavender, cedar, geranium, lotus flower, resin oils. These scents were so famous that it is said Cleopatra even took her personal perfumers with her when traveling to Rome. Entertainment, Egypt's simple but joyful world. Egyptians loved entertainment. Weddings, religious festivals, harvest feasts. At every opportunity, music, dance, and games came into play. Some of the most common musical instruments were lyre, flute, drum, sistrum, a rattling sacred instrument. Harp dancers performed in temples, private feasts, and public celebrations. The favorite game of children was a wooden strategy game called senet. This game is considered one of the early ancestors of modern chess. The professions of Egypt, the silent gears of a society. Professions in ancient Egypt were very diverse. Everyone had a role in society, and every duty was considered sacred. The main professions included farmer, craftsman, soldier, scribe, priest, merchant, fisherman, construction worker, weaver, potter. Among these, the most prestigious was being a scribe. Knowing hieroglyphic writing was not something everyone could do. Scribes kept temple records, wrote taxes, created royal documents, played an important role in every administration. Scribes held a respected position in society because writing was seen as a gift from the god Thoth. A harmonious life between fields and homes. In ancient Egypt, life had a perfect balance between work and home. People who worked intensely during the day returned to a calmer rhythm with their families in the evening. At home, women kneaded bread, brewed beer, maintained the order of the house, watched over the children. Men worked in the fields, checked irrigation channels, went to the market, helped with state labor when necessary. Many balances lost in the modern world continued in a much simpler form in that era. Evening hours, the quietest time of ancient Egypt. As the sun set on the horizon, Egypt's homes were filled with a peaceful silence. Small oil lamps were lit, and dinner tables were prepared. Evening meals usually consisted of bread, barley porridge, boiled vegetables, fish, wine or beer. After dinner, people climbed onto their rooftops, and if the weather was cool, they slept there. The sky was their ceiling. And another day ended quietly like this. Beliefs, understanding of health, education system, and perception of death in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, daily life was not limited only to working, preparing food, going to the market, or going up to the rooftop at night. There was another aspect of this life that was invisible but always felt: belief, death, and the thought of the afterlife. For the Egyptian people, life was a flow intertwined with gods, surrounded by rituals and full of symbols. In this part, we enter the areas that most deeply touch the spirit of Egypt: health, education, family structure, and deep beliefs about life after death. Belief, a life intertwined with gods. For ancient Egyptians, the gods were not distant beings. They were forces felt in every moment of life, influencing every movement of nature and even guiding daily events. When the sun rose, Ra began his journey across the sky. When the Nile flooded, Hapi brought abundance. When people became ill, Sekhmet was believed to be testing them. When protection was needed, the Eye of Horus came into play. For this reason, small rituals were very common in the daily lives of Egyptians. Sometimes protective symbols were drawn on the doors of houses. Children wore amulets around their necks, and before beginning a new task, small offerings were made to the gods. While ordinary people performed small rituals in their daily lives, the rituals in major temples were carried out by priests. Every ritual was considered essential to maintaining Egypt's cosmic balance. Education, the power of knowledge. Not everyone in ancient Egypt received an education. However, those who did held a very high place in society. The largest educational institutions were the scribe schools. In these schools, children learned hieroglyphic and hieratic writing, studied mathematics and measurement units, read religious texts, learned to copy state documents. Education was more accessible to children of wealthy families. However, sometimes talented children were also accepted into priest schools. The life of a scribe may seem easy, but it was very disciplined. They woke up early in the morning, wrote on tablets for long hours, kept records, and edited ritual texts. Because of the complexity of hieroglyphs, anyone who received this education was considered valuable. Scribes were regarded as the brain power of Egyptian society. Medicine and health, the healers of the ancient world. Egyptians were surprisingly advanced in the field of medicine. Their knowledge was based on both experience and religion. Doctors, healers, and priests' medicine in Egypt was divided into three main groups. 1. Doctors, Sunu, treated physical illnesses. Applied herbal remedies, bandages, and treatments for fractures and dislocations. 2. Priest healers, tried to heal spiritual illnesses through prayers and rituals. 3. Magicians, provided protection against evil spirits and prepared amulets. Medical texts, the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith. Papyrus are some of the important documents showing the medical knowledge of Egyptians. These papyri contain information such as wound treatments, care of burns, eye diseases, treatment of parasites, birth applications, herbal medicine recipes. Egyptians believed that illnesses sometimes had physical causes and sometimes spiritual ones. Thus, treatments involved both medical and magical elements. Women and family life, the quiet pillar of the home. The position of women in ancient Egyptian society was much higher compared to many civilizations. Women managed the home, could make economic decisions, could own property, could appear in court, could engage in trade, had the right to divorce. In family life, the woman was considered the heart of the home. The education of children, the order of the house, and social ties were mostly under the control of women. Childbirth was considered both sacred and dangerous. During childbirth, the goddess Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, and Bes, the protective dwarf god, were believed to help. Amulets of these figures were kept in birthing rooms. Childhood, play, learning, and being. Part of the community, children in ancient Egypt were loved and protected. The Egyptians believed that children were a gift from the gods. Children played in the streets, used wooden toys, made clay animal figurines, played small musical instruments. Girls often helped with household tasks, while boys were raised to become familiar with their father's work. However, children from high-status families could receive special education and attend scribe or priest schools. Childhood was a light period full of both play and responsibility. Pets. A member of the family Egyptians had great affection for animals. Cats were especially considered sacred. The most common animals in homes were cats, dogs, Monkeys, birds, ducks, geese, cats were indispensable because they kept rodents away. They were also the symbol of the goddess Bastet. Harming a cat could even be considered a serious crime. Egyptians sometimes even mummified their deceased pets and buried them in small graves. Death, not an end, but a beginning. In ancient Egypt, death did not mean it is over. According to their belief, death was only the door to another life. There was a journey to begin after the moment of death, and this journey had to be completed safely. For this reason, burial rituals were very detailed. Mummification of the body, protection of the heart, adding prayers that would guide the soul, preparing grave goods. Egyptians believed that the heart carried all emotions and one's level of righteousness. In the afterlife, the heart was weighed against Ma'at's feather. If the heart was light, the person passed into the afterlife. If it was heavy, the soul was destroyed. For this reason, this weighing of the heart scene is frequently depicted in tomb paintings. Mummification, preparing the body for eternity. The most well-known ritual of Egypt is mummification. This process was both a religious duty and a necessity for the soul's journey. The mummification process included removal of internal organs, drying with natron, softening with oils, wrapping with linen, placing protective amulets, positioning in the coffin. This process sometimes took up to 70 days. The wealthy were mummified with great care, while the poor received a simpler version. Tombs, houses of immortality. In ancient Egypt, tombs were considered homes. For this reason, the inside of the tomb was filled with the belongings the deceased might need. Furniture, clothing, food containers, toys, jewelry. Some tombs even contained family portraits. Everything inside the tomb was meant to ease the person's passage into the afterlife. The end of a day, the continuation of a life in Egypt. Daily life had a steady rhythm from birth to death. When the simplicity of life's flow, the depth of the belief system, and the society's sense of duty came together, a civilization that lasted thousands of years emerged. This part is the final step of that rhythm. It shows that ancient Egypt was not only made up of stones, inscriptions, and kings, but also of people who breathed, thought, hoped, worried, loved, and lived. And so, our journey into the daily life of ancient Egypt ends here.